At the radio station, the train stopped. The end of the line, and the building was a single-story white building with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. The tower on top was made from recycled steel, and it almost looked like it would topple over if it wasn't for the cables keeping it up. Fascinating. I wonder if it'll be warmer inside. I wondered out loud for a second. Everyone gathered up as we headed into the radio station. The foyer was full of overstuffed leather chairs and a very large painting over the fireplace. It depicted a knight in a helmet riding a horse and carrying a cup in his hand. The Jack of Hearts, or maybe the Knight of Hearts? Things that have to deal with the arcana or cartomancy were not my specialty. I was a lot more comfortable in things like laws and rules. Something else that made the foyer unique was the 6 different doors. Each one was made to resemble cards from the Hearts suit of cards. If there was an ace, all the way to 6. The rules of this room. We had rules, hadn't we? Thankfully, a hidden speaker in the room started to speak. Welcome, welcome, 3 times welcome to my home. I don't usually get so many unexpected friends, but thankfully for you, my heart has plenty of room. There will be 6 chambers to escape. Each room will have rules, and a few are expected to follow. The rules here are simple. There are 6 locked doors. To open a door, you have to knock on the door. The door you knock on will be unlocked. However, 5 of these doors contain a single enemy, and only 1 door does not. The same door that leads out of the foyer to the dining room. You can join me there after you handle this room. Good luck, the voice said before there was silence in the room again. Okay, let's try and peek underneath the door and see if we see anything, Autumn suggested before everyone agreed, and we laid our heads to the floor to try and see what was beyond the door. Unfortunately, the carpet was in our way, and we couldn't see anything under the small crack beneath the door. We couldn't even see lights beyond the door, so it seemed that wasn't going to work. Well, back to square one, Autumn suggested before I shook my head and said, actually, we're not back to square one. We confirmed that path didn't work, so now we know it won't work. So we can try something different. Try what, smart guy? Autumn asked before I gave my first idea. Let's listen to the doors. See if we can hear breathing or movement. If we can hear it, then we know not to go through that door. The only door we don't hear anything is the right door, I said, and Dylan, Fallen Grace, Summer, and Marceline all nodded along, agreeing, while Autumn tried to think of something better. Well, fine, but he'll probably have already thought of that, and he wouldn't keep the exit quiet, Autumn said as we all chose our doors. She had the ace, and I got the 3 of hearts. I listened closely, and I couldn't hear anything. After a couple of minutes, I removed my ear from the door, and I asked everyone else, can you all hear anything? Everyone else nodded, and I pointed towards my door. This is the way out. There's no noise behind my door, I said before Autumn spoke up again. How do you know your monster isn't just quiet? Because everyone else heard something. If the problem was a quiet monster, we would have multiple doors with no noise behind it. Since our problem is 5 monsters and 6 doors, we just have to find the door that was different. This is the door that's different, so it is the right door, I said, pointing to the 3 of hearts. You don't know if that's true. For all you know, he has a quiet monster and a sound system to make the correct door sound like there's a monster behind it, Autumn recommended to the group's disbelieving ears. I stood in silence for a moment before I asked, what would you recommend we use to test the doors? What alternative are you suggesting? I asked her as she realized she had no alternative. She had no other method of verification to propose. If she did, she would have started with that method of verification instead of immediately telling me what I was doing was wrong. I'm very familiar with that method. People telling me that I was wrong without offering the right answer, expecting me to just understand what they wanted in their heads, when what they really wanted to say is they wanted to be the one with the right answer. We can have Fallen Grace check under each door, starting with the ace, so that way we know if it's safe or not, Autumn recommended before the fairy responded with one word. No. Well, maybe we can force the door open to check it, she offered before the team turned away from her and gathered around my door. I took a deep breath as I knocked on the door. The knock echoed through the foyer as the door creaked open, and it revealed a long white hallway with various paintings on the walls. I saw paintings of roses, paintings of nude nymphs around a pond, paintings of Zeus sitting with his sister Hera and their children, paintings of Hao Yi and Chang'e, paintings of Eros with his arrows, and even a painting of Jophiel with her flaming sword. Maybe the host was a big fan of archery and warfare in general. These paintings were certainly beautiful, however, they weren't my style, nor what I enjoyed. Everyone else was admiring the paintings, though. I think they were confused by the painting of Jophiel. I thought it was obvious with the flaming sword and heart imagery in the background, but not everyone is into the same things I am into. So I waited for a few moments as we all admired the paintings. Dylan took the chance to get close to Summer while they both looked at Jophiel. Autumn also tried to get close to Fallen Grace, who took the chance to fly further from her. Marceline only looked at the paintings, then looked away like she was ashamed of them in some way. It wasn't my thing, but I don't think the paintings were shameful to look at. We continued down the hallway, where we made it to the dining room. At the head of the table there was a suit of armor sitting at the chair, not moving, and he held a single golden cup in one hand, and in his other hand he held a realistic human heart, still beating, but thankfully with no blood. We approached the table carefully. There was a name plaque at each chair. Places were set for each of us. The name in front of the chair, directly in front of the knight, didn't have a proper name. It had two lines with adjectives instead. Venerable Tranquility, the plaque said. We turned to each other, and none of us understood what that name would possibly mean. It felt important, but it also felt like it wasn't for us to understand. Maybe it was something that only Dealer Jack was supposed to understand. I found my place, and I sat there, and so did everyone else. Dylan was on my left, and Fallen Grace was on my right. There was a closed menu book in front of us, and also an envelope. The envelope had our names, and as we sat in silence, it took Fallen Grace a moment to realize the connection. She didn't explain to anyone else before she simply said, "Fuck you, Dealer Jack, I just realized what you did." I looked around the table, and I didn't quite get it. Sure, Fallen Grace was far too small for her chair, but she still sat in it, and she did sit across from Autumn. Maybe she was just upset about being across from someone she didn't like. I was sitting across from Marceline, and Dylan sat across from Summer, who both seemed happy about the arrangement, and Marceline couldn't care less. Finally, though, our host spoke from inside the armor. His voice boomed across the room. He clearly had a lot of practice projecting his voice, and he was willing to do so, just to get his point across. Welcome, my guests. I'm glad you have figured out the foyer, and now it is time to figure out the next step. But before we do that, I wish to introduce myself. I am Disc Jockey, Dr. John D. Jake Dealer Jack. Though you may call me Dealer Jack, it's what most people call me, he said within his armor, still not moving, still grabbing the cup and the heart. Well, Dealer Jack, it is a pleasure to meet you. I hope you excuse me for not shaking your hand. Autumn started before the helmet turned to focus on Autumn. You are not excused, he said bluntly, and she was confused. Oh, I don't mean to be excused from the table. I mean to be excused from shaking your hand. She tried to play it off with a chuckle, only for Dealer Jack to respond bluntly. I fully understood what you meant, and you are not excused from shaking my hand. he told her as his left hand dropped the heart to the table as he reached his hand across to her. I could see blood on his armored glove, and it was dripping down from his hands onto the table as he reached across the table. His left hand reached out to her. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to think of a way out of the situation. Well, I'm sure we would all be honored to shake your hand, Mr. Jack. It would be a shame for me to go first, she said. Her hands clutched the tablecloth while Dealer Jack shook his helmet. Dealer Jack. Mr. Jack is my brother-in-law. I'm not shaking everyone's hand. I am shaking your hand. You wouldn't be rude to the host, would you? He said in a voice that hinted that there would be consequences for being rude. Now, with no other options, she reluctantly lifted her left hand out to him, a tattooed knot around her wrist, as she reached to shake his bloody hand. His hand enveloped her hand, and as she let go of his hand, the blood from his hand soaked into her hand. Even as she tried to wipe the blood off in the red cloth napkin, her hand remained stained with blood. Red-handed is a terrible thing to be caught as, especially in the casino. The blood of a victim still on your hand? That is pretty much admitting guilt before a trial, even if you didn't do anything wrong. So, I hope you watch your tongue next time before interrupting a host while they're speaking, he said as he picked up the beating heart that was now bleeding blood onto his hand while he spoke. He turned to us all as we sat in silence. Satisfied with our silence, he now spoke again. As I was saying, we have a marvelous kitchen here with wonderful menus. However, as you know, there are so many food taboos in this era. Food allergies, intolerances, religious exemptions, autoimmune disorders, and so many other horrible things. So, we will need to have a proper meal where everyone eats, but you cannot eat everything on the menu. In the envelope with your name on it is your list of food taboos and the consequence if you break them. And there is a menu in front of you. Everyone's menu is different from each other's, meaning everyone has unique choices. Simple enough? Now here are the rules. Dealer Jack leaned forward, and even without seeing his face, I could hear the smile in his voice. No one can leave their chairs. Leaving a chair will lead to you being sent to the countryside, or what's left of it. No one can fast from this meal. Everyone will order a drink, an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert. Everyone will drink something and eat something as well. Items may only be sent back to the kitchen at my request. And the final rule is that no one may swap the envelopes with their taboos on it. Are there any questions? There weren't any. Good. Now open your envelopes, he said as I opened my envelope. The list was relatively short, but reading it, it made my heart sink deep when I saw the foods and their consequences. Corn, I would get a nosebleed. Rice, I would get a migraine. Wheat, I would get a seizure for 30 seconds. Barley, I would wake up away from the pumpkin house. Seizures were definitely not something I was looking forward to, but these weren't just foods, they were ingredients. The supermajority of food and drinks had some variation of these ingredients. Now, I don't have to just avoid these foods and drinks. I would have to avoid anything that had that ingredient. When I checked the menu, the drinks on the list already had a few options I couldn't have. Thankfully, the means it was served and also the ingredients were listed, but I could already see things I couldn't have. Chocolate, orange juice, milkshake, and even the apple juice all had corn syrup in it. There was beer served in a crystal stein, but I would never drink alcohol. Haunted house or not, I was never crossing that line. I had seen what it did to my brother and my father. I was never going to let it touch my lips. Also, the fact the beer was brewed from wheat and barley, so my only options were water in a plastic cup or coffee in a styrofoam cup. I closed my menu, making my choice. Fallen Grace practically danced over her menu before muttering and making her choice. Everyone else closed their menus before making their choices, as we set our choices to Dealer Jack. Everyone else ordered water. I was the only one to order a beverage. He nodded as we made the orders, and he kept sitting there while his staff worked on our drinks. Although I don't know how long it would take to make 5 cups of tap water and 1 cup of coffee. Turns out the answer is way too long. While we waited, Dealer Jack tried to make small talk with me. So, Cal, did you enjoy the paintings in the hallway? I had each of them commissioned personally, he said with no small amount of pride, and I nodded, trying to be polite. Jophiel was definitely a favorite. The flaming sword is absolutely something pretty cool, although I am definitely more of a fan of Themis or Raguel, I responded to his question. You do know that Jophiel is the angel of love, Dealer Jack said to me before I nodded and the drinks finally arrived. The waiter from the kitchen was dressed in classic waiter attire. However, they had no body. As far as we can tell, they were either invisible or they were clothed serving the drinks to us all from the tray before they vanished back into the kitchen. I did know that, but I also know that she has another name, Dinah, which, as you probably know, means judgment. Dealer Jack finished for me, like he was biting into something by saying that. He didn't have water. He had wine poured into his golden cup, which he lifted to his helmet, seemingly smelling it through his armor before he offered it to me. You should try this. It is a very chocolatey wine with floral bouquets, he said as he tried to slide it across to me. I lifted my hand to refuse. I don't drink alcohol, I told him, only for his voice to get a bit louder in response. Alcohol isn't one of your listed taboos, he said, trying to convince me to drink it from his cup. I don't drink alcohol. At all. I slid the cup back to him, and he sat in silence before he decided to answer. Fine, but if you won't drink it, then I won't either, he said in defiance before I pointed out the rule to him. Didn't you say that everyone had to drink and eat? Doesn't that include you? I asked, and he paused before he nodded. He lifted the cup to his helmet as he lifted the visor, as he lifted the wine cup to his empty helmet. He had nothing underneath his armor, only darkness underneath the armor, like a wraith. The wine slowly vanished into the darkness with no sound, just a quiet disappearance. I lifted the coffee to my mouth and I sipped it. I smiled and the empty armor focused on me while I drank my coffee. And all of my friends focused on me while I drank coffee. I don't know why everyone was staring at me as I sipped more coffee. When I noticed there was red in my coffee, as I lifted my cloth napkin to my nose, when I realized I was bleeding. Why am I bleeding? I asked the Knight of Hearts, who responded with a tinge of sadness in his voice. Styrofoam uses cornstarch as a separator. That way it doesn't stick to each other. But since it isn't a food, the ingredient doesn't have to be listed, he said while I kept the cloth to my nose for a few more minutes until it finally stopped bleeding. No longer wishing to touch the cup in front of me anymore, he literally set it up where I cannot even be clever on the menu. Probably forced us into the simplest option or even giving us no options at all. You may open your menus again and find something to eat as an appetizer, he said as I opened the menu in front of me and things changed again. There was popcorn, caramel apples, cheddar sticks, and even scrambled egg toast. All things I cannot eat at all. I could see everyone else was looking over their menu. We all had different intolerances, so how were all of us having it where it was impossible for us to have anything to eat? And then I had an idea, a way we can bypass the rules but follow them at the same time. Hey, Fallen Grace, can I see your menu and I can show you mine? I asked her and she nodded. Flying off her open menu, I placed mine in front of where she was, and I was able to see hers. Now my appetizer options included things like chicken soup, baked potatoes, jalapeno poppers, and even banana slices. Now I had a few options I could eat. See anything you want from my menu? I asked her and she nodded. And so I turned to the others. I think I found a way we can do this. We have to swap menus. The menus are attuned to what we can't eat, not to what others can't eat. So as long as we swap the menus, we can order food that we can eat. I said as the others swapped menus around, and Dealer Jack's expression was not seen, but I could swear his posture told me that he was smiling at our cleverness. We made our orders, and I had banana slices that I greedily ate up, while the Jack of Hearts slowly dropped peeled grapes into his helmet. Well, tell me, Kel, don't you love the story of Romeo and Juliet? Isn't it so wonderful that by the end of it all, they wound up together, even when they were from completely different sides of a feud? Personally, I prefer Hamlet, although Romeo and Juliet does have its moments, such as the death of Mercutio and the desperate apothecary. I responded, and Dealer Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Well, yeah, I guess Hamlet and Ophelia were cute together, although maybe he would have been better with Horatio? Dealer Jack said, and I shook my head. Nah, Hamlet wasn't all that kind to anyone. Even to people he loved, he was so obsessed with revenge, he killed the very people he was trying to protect. Although Ophelia had one very clever thing going for her, it helped her win in the end of it all, I said as Dealer Jack asked. What was that? Make everyone think you're crazy and don't know what's going on, while they try to manipulate you, I said as I finally finished my sliced bananas, and Dealer Jack cleared his throat. But isn't it so sweet that Romeo was listening to Juliet lamenting over him when she didn't realize he was there at the balcony? She listened, and he offered to swear by the moon, and she asked him not to swear over something as unfaithful as the moon. Taylor Jack asked, and I shook my head. Romeo was risking his life for another crush. Before Juliet, it was Rosaline. He sees Juliet from a distance, and he falls in love with her, and his actions lead to the death of his friend Mercutio and the death of Tybalt, and likely escalated the feud even further. Eavesdropping on a private soliloquy doesn't exactly scream compassion. It's a lot more creepy than anything else. Along with committing suicide over his crush's perceived death, caring for her could have meant that he could have kept on living, just knowing that she cared enough for him wanting to live. Her death doesn't mean that Romeo has to die for them to be together. The grand irony is death is eternal and life is ephemeral. You get one life, but you die many deaths until the last one. He could have kept living on, fixing the mistakes of the feud, living a happy life, even going as far to apologize for causing her death. He could have lived such a happy life that when he did die, he would have found her after judgment, their happiness assured, and he would have had a life worth living because he had loved. If he made the decision to go down that route, then Juliet would have woken up, almost as if by miracle, and then they would have lived together happily. All he had to do was wait and be patient, not rush into decisions and think things through. Making a decision that you cannot go back from is never a decision that should be made lightly. And imagine how much more powerful a tale it would have been if he didn't choose to kill and die for her, but if he chose to heal and live because of her. That love was so powerful it inspires you to change and improve. not worsen the worst parts of yourself. Is it a great tragedy? Absolutely. It warns of how feuds can destroy and how even love can be corrupted and ended with it. However, too many people see the deaths of both Romeo and Juliet and think that means love conquers all, instead of seeing love as being corrupted and conquered. I told Dealer Jack, who nodded. I see you put a lot of thought into it, but haven't you ever loved someone who had died? Someone who you loved so much that even remembering who they were and the fact that you can't tell them anything anymore, that their absence hurts you in ways you cannot possibly quantify because a piece of yourself is gone forever? He said it like he was going to catch me in some kind of trap, and I nodded. I have. I have lost someone precisely like that. I lost my older brother at a young age. My parents have often told me that they wish that I was the one who had died. I am reminded of him every day, and I hurt missing him. I hurt so much that I don't even remember what it was like to be free of pain. And yet, I live. I don't simply survive, I live. I smile, I laugh, I cry, I scream, I eat, I sing, I dance, and I live. Every day I smile. I smile to help others smile, and I smile for those who can't smile. I live, and I live happily. I know that he is happy that I live, and I know that spending the rest of my life lamenting over him is not how he wants me to live. He doesn't want me to die to be with him. Life is ephemeral, but death is eternal. Whether I die tonight, in a year, in 10, 100, 1,000, or even 100,000, I will see my brother again. And when we do, I will have a lot to tell him. I said with my smile as Dealer Jack was silent before he answered out loud. Time to order entrees, and there is a new rule. You cannot trade menus with anyone else, he said, and I clarified. So the rule is we cannot trade the menus. Is that correct? I asked him, and he nodded. So I opened my menu and I made my order as the first thing on the menu. Spaghetti and meatballs. The others took a second before they did the same thing that I did. They all ordered the first thing on the menu, closing the menu, and I could see doubt inside Autumn and Summer's eyes. One of Marceline's eyes twinkled with trust, and her other eye twinkled with the red prince's recognition and intelligence. Very clever, Haj, she seemed to tell me. Fallen Grace's eyes were too small to look at, but she trusted her sister, and by extension, me. That was reassuring because that meant she was starting to trust me, and I know that Fallen Grace had no trust in humanity, which is more than fair. However, even though she couldn't trust humanity, she could trust a hero, even if that hero was human. That hero was her sister. Dealer Jack was very confused by her strategy. Haj, you do realize spaghetti contains wheat, right? I know, Dealer Jack. You do know the consequences of consuming wheat, right? I will seize for 30 seconds, most likely falling out of my chair, and I will be kicked out of the pumpkin house, ruining the whole trip, not even going to make it to the center of the pumpkin house. Did I get that wrong? I responded, and he tilted his head and shook it. No, you're correct, but what did you do? I ordered the first thing I saw on the menu. Why did you order the first thing on the menu? Because we aren't allowed to trade menus. There's no point in trying to figure out what is the one item on the menu I can have when clearly all the items are made to catch us in our food taboo, I said before he dropped his hands on the table. Not everything is something you can't have. I don't get what you're doing. You should have tried to find out what was the right item or tried to figure out some clever way to get past me. I didn't realize that you were just giving up. You didn't seem the type to give up, he said, and I rested my head on my hands as I turned to face Dealer Jack. And when he saw my face, he leaned back into his chair, like he was surprised by what he saw in my face. You really don't understand me at all. Who said I was giving up? I just found a way to win with the rules you gave us. Just because you don't see how doesn't mean that I haven't won, I said, just as our food arrived from the kitchen. I got the spaghetti with garlic bread, and I saw Marceline got a big steak with no sauce and covered in crushed garlic cloves, garlic mashed potatoes. We took one look at each other, and I pushed my plate towards the Red Prince, and she pushed her plate back. Even with no physical changes, I recognized that look in her eyes. She was quite pleased with our victory as I tore into my steak and the others all swapped their plates. No, 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 you weren't supposed to do this. I said the menus cannot be traded. He must have recognized what was happening. Wait, I didn't say the food couldn't be traded, just the menus, but why order the first thing on the menu? You have no idea what everyone else is or isn't intolerant to. There was no guarantee you'd order something the others would be able to have, Dealer Jack said as I cut some of the juicy steak and I explained as I chewed. Actually, there was. Like you said, there was one item on each menu we could have. None of us share a single intolerance. There wouldn't be any fun in it to have 6 people unable to eat gluten. There's 6 of us, and only 4 entrees on each of our menus. That is 24 different possible food choices. If I focus on my own menu, that's only a 25% chance I pick a food I can have. However, if I split my chances with everyone else, that percentage of getting food that I cannot have is reduced to only 12.5%. And the beauty of it, by sharing with my friends this way, reduces my odds of a failure to almost 0%. Everyone has a 75% chance of picking a food that I can have. But if we multiply those odds, the odds of all the foods chosen being one I cannot have, 0.09%, nearly guaranteeing that I would have food, and with everyone else participating in the trading, those odds are shared. So now we are thriving. Just one last course to go, and we can move on, he said with a smile. Actual food allergies don't really work like that. Allergies have a lot of overlap, and ingredients are used in a lot of different ways. Wheat could have easily been in every one of my friends' menus on every single item, so I was putting a lot of faith into my friends and my own personal hypothesis. However, understanding that this was a game also meant seeing it as a game. When I saw Fallen Grace's menu, I saw that almost all of them had fruits. However, curiously, all of the ingredients were free of corn, rice, wheat, and barley. Even the chicken soup was curiously free of noodles and cornstarch. The menus are made to trick us, and only by trading menus and then the plates, we actually force the menus into working with us. Although I doubt he will be tricked again. More specifically, I doubt he will be tricked the exact same way again. Very clever, but there is one final course. For the last course, any plate you order on your own menu cannot be traded with someone else's, he said, and I nodded before I confirmed it. We cannot trade our plate for another person's plate, is that correct? I asked, and he was about to nod before he rephrased his rule. No. Whatever dessert you order on the menu cannot be traded with someone else's dessert, he said, trying to be clear as I tried to clarify again. So whatever dessert we don't trade, it for a different dessert, I asked him, and I could hear him growl underneath his armor. No. How about this? You can't trade food at all, he said, thinking that he now had a solid rule. So we cannot trade food, is that correct? I asked him, and he nodded. No more trading food, he said as I nodded and my friends looked nervous, but my smile did not waver for a single moment. I already had my trap set and Red Prince saw, and she calmed down. Everyone calm down. Kel has got this, she said, and I nodded again as I opened my menu. This time I carefully looked over my options. There was chocolate pie, cheesecake, strawberries and whipped cream, and peanut butter pails. I had my answer. I glanced over to Marceline and she nodded subtly. I glanced at Fall and Grace, Summer, Autumn, and Dylan. They all seemed to be following my lead. I hoped they were putting the same degree of care into their answers as I was. We'll have the strawberry and whipped cream, please, I said, and everyone else made their orders. Dealer Jack looked like he was only more confused. Do you think you're playing this game right now? He asked, and I shrugged. I'm playing it by its rules. However, whether or not I'm playing it right is truly subjective. Someone can play by the rules and still play it completely wrong. Hide and seek is meant to be sought after, but someone can hide forever, and that would be considered a wrong way to play hide and seek, I said, and Dealer Jack rested his helmet on his hand. You are so curious. You do remind me of Horatio, and I do hope you find that as a compliment, he told me before I chuckled. I guess that makes you the Hamlet of this story? I asked him, and he shrugged with a rattle. I like to think so. I like to think of myself as the hero of every story, and Hamlet is obviously the hero of the play that holds his name, he said with no sense of irony. I hope you remember in Hamlet what happened to Horatio, and more importantly, what happened to Hamlet, I said as his head dropped, looking down at the table. He forgot that having your name on the marquee doesn't make you the hero, and that Hamlet died, ignoring Horatio's warnings, and now he was here trying to figure out what warning I was giving him. Well, I hope you have your own fun with the pirates, I said as the plates came out. Everyone had their desserts in front of them, and now I had a very deliberate action. I pushed my plate on into the middle of the table, within easy reach of everyone else, and everyone copied my own actions, as we all took our own favorite morsels from others' plates. Why are you doing this? I said you cannot trade food, he said, and I nodded, taking a bite of strawberry from my own plate. We aren't trading. There is no trading. We just put the plates in the middle and everyone is taking what they want. We ordered off our own menus, we didn't trade food, and we didn't skip a single course. And we stayed in our seats. So, what rule did we break? I asked, and he sighed before he shook his helmet. I guess you broke none, so you can head to the kitchen before trying to find your way out. Just remember, Kel, Horatio didn't escape unscathed, and neither will you. At least I'll tell your story, I told Dealer Jack as he slumped into his chair. Like his armor was now empty, and the door to the kitchen creaked open. I guess it was safe to leave, although everyone else hesitated to get up, so I had to stand up first and then walked into the kitchen. The kitchen was a lot larger than a typical kitchen. There were two different fridges, a pantry door, an oven large enough to cook an entire steer, and the stove had over a dozen different burners, and there was a large island with numerous utensils on it, mostly knives and forks. The wall was covered in posters reminding people of the proper cooking temperature of all kinds of food, from chicken to sugar, milk, and even things like ice cream. Any clue where their exit is? Autumn asked me while I shook my head. No, I don't see any way out, but I think we should try and find something that might be a clue on how to leave. Maybe check out the boards with the cooking temperature and we can find something useful, I said, pointing at the listed cooking temperatures while Autumn scoffed. Please, let's try the pantry door first, she said, opening the pantry door to reveal the pantry behind it. Awesome. So we know that's where the pantry is. Maybe there's a clue there. You can check in there and we can try other things, see if there's something we can use. Try and look for something that doesn't fit in with everything else. Maybe an outlier or an ingredient that doesn't fit. I told Autumn, who waved me off as she walked into the pantry with Summer and Dylan following. Marceline, Fallen Grace, and myself looked over the listed cooking temperatures of various food items. One interesting piece that stuck out to me was the boiling point of ice at negative 80 degrees Celsius. Science wasn't my strongest suit, but I knew that ice was a solid, so it doesn't boil. It melts, and even then it doesn't melt 80 degrees below when it freezes. That might be our way out of here. Let's check the stove real quick, Fallen Grace pointed out as she flew over to the stove, where we noticed the stove knob didn't just have positive temperatures, but also negative temperatures. This was definitely not how stoves are supposed to work, although it might be something we can use. Quick, let's find a pot or pan and see if we can get some ice in there, I said as I first tried to pull open the fridge on the right, only to realize that it was locked shut. A 4-digit combination lock on the doors. Thankfully, the fridge on the left was open, and the freezer has a tray full of ice cubes. Any pots? I asked as Marceline brought over a large pot that I quickly filled with the trays of ice cubes. Then Marceline placed the pot on the stove and put the burner on negative 80 degrees Celsius. The fire burned at a blue tone, but instead of heat, waves of cool air rolled off the flame, and the pot filled with cold fog. And when I felt the cold air, I pulled back when I realized what it was. Dry ice, I told everyone as I slammed the glass lid on the pot, and I tried to adjust the temperature on the stove. Even with the lid on, the pot, some of the freezing cold carbon dioxide clouds still leaked out, and when it did, I could see words written on the glass lid, only revealed by the fog, but it was always there on the lid. Don't bring dry ice to boiling temperatures, it said, and I realized we just violated that rule, even though we didn't know the rule existed. You have to get it back into the freezer, Fallen Grace said, as she flew over to the freezer. However, when she tried to pull it open, it would not open. It was sealed shut. This time the magnets moved on the fridge. Once it was just random letters, and now it formed into a brand new rule. Each fridge can only be opened once. How are the others doing? I asked as we headed to the pantry. Inside the pantry, Dylan was reading over the ingredient list of flour, while Autumn was seething in a corner, refusing to speak to anyone. We found a clue that says we need to find a passcode on the ingredient list. It said that it would open the fridge. Dylan pointed at a single whiteboard that said exactly what he said. Curiously, though, Autumn was sitting away from everyone else, not even trying to help. Are you okay, Autumn? I asked, only to have Dylan answer. Don't bother with her. She won't try to help us. She's convinced that we're doing it wrong, Dylan said as I turned to Autumn and back to Dylan. Autumn was convinced you were doing it wrong, so she opted to do nothing instead of trying something different. I asked and Dylan nodded. What's the problem? He asked before I asked. Who are you, and what did you do to my friends? I asked Dylan, who only looked confused. What are you talking about, Kel? It's me, he said, lifting both of his hands up, revealing the fact that he had no ring on either of his hands. Autumn is a lot of things. She is not someone who chooses to do nothing. She would rather do the wrong thing than do nothing, even if doing nothing is the easiest thing to do. Summer also would never let anyone else speak on her nor her sister's behalf. She would rather represent herself in court than let someone else speak on her behalf. And of course, Dylan would never go anywhere without his ring. He would die before he let go of that ring, I told the stranger, pretending to be Dylan. He tilted his head, then he kept tilting and tilting, his head hanging upside down and his smile spreading wider and wider as the illusion fell apart. Coiled around me was the body of a large serpent, the head hanging upside down from the ceiling. The underside of the jaw had a single word written on it: exit. The coils squeezed tighter and tighter around me, but I refused to struggle, and this confused the snake. Why don't you struggle? The snake asked, as the orange and black striped snake mouth grew closer to me. Because you didn't notice that I was the only one who entered, I told the snake as it opened its mouth, only to have a pot full of evaporating dry ice thrown into its mouth. As the mouth was full of freezing carbon dioxide, the snake struggled and loosened its grip on me, and from the coils, Dylan, Autumn, and Summer were visible again. Fallen Grace proudly posed, having thrown the pot into the snake's mouth. I think I know the code out of here now, I said as I pointed at the word on the snake's jaw. Exit 3948. Is everyone all right? I asked, and when we got the affirmative answers, I headed to the fridge where I dialed in the 4-digit code, and it opened the door, revealing a completely unrelated room. A room that was the DJ booth. It was big enough for all of us, and the song playing was on a tape on a radio. A simple song with violins. The tape had a digital display showing how much time was left on the tape. Less than 3 minutes. The door across the room had a timer with 3 minutes and 30 seconds. There was a single crank that looked like it was attached to the door. Autumn went over to the door and she spun the crank. It spun easily, but no matter how fast she spun it, the timer only counted down 1 second at a time. Still, there was no way the timer was going to count down to 0 seconds before the song was over. I looked over the choices on the cassette player. The first and most obvious choice was to click pause on the music. The music is paused, maybe that means the song doesn't end. So I paused the tape and the music stopped. Autumn kept spinning the crank, but the timer was stuck at 3 minutes and 4 seconds and it would not count down. I saw that there were 2 minutes and 16 seconds left on the tape. So I tried a different option. I clicked rewind to see if that would work. The timer on the tape went back up, and the timer on the door moved back to 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The crank was still moving forward, the tape back at 3 minutes. I kept it paused for a moment as I thought, and I looked at all the other buttons, most of which I don't recognize, but I assumed was similar to what a disc jockey would use in a radio station. I don't know. Does anyone else have any ideas here? I asked, pointing at the many buttons and switches there. Dylan, Marceline, and Fallen Grace took a great glance, but they all shook their heads, not sure what to do. Summer and Autumn, however, touched the buttons. They turned to each other, and then Autumn answered. Here, this knob is playback rate. It is at 100%. Reduce it to 75%. That should give me enough time for the music to play until the crank gets solved. So turn it down to 75%, and then when we tell you, press play. Summer told me, and I nodded, turning down the knob to 75%, and then Autumn and Summer stood at the crank. When they nodded to me, I pressed play, and the music came out of the speakers slowly. The timer on the radio ticked down slower than normal, but the crank still counted down second by second. After 3 minutes and 30 seconds, the tape had 30 seconds left on the timer as the The door opened. The door opened into the darkness, but the timer on the tape continued to count down even with the door open. Clearly, we would get separated easily. We quickly walked into the next room. In the low light of the next room, we heard the voice of Dealer Jack. "Welcome to my trophy room. There are plenty of trophies on the walls. Touch one, though, the lights will dim. Break a trophy and a light gets broken. There are several doors that lead out of here, but each door is lit by a light bulb. If the light bulb is broken, the door will not open. So, if the lights are too dim, you may not find it. And if the light bulbs are broken, you cannot get out. So, be careful with my trophies. Unless you want to become a trophy," Dealer Jack said with a chuckle. So now this is going to be a physical challenge. Let's stick to the middle of the walkway and hold hands. Now let us get through here slowly but carefully, Dylan said as I held his hand and Marceline grabbed my hand, with Falling Grace on her shoulder with Autumn and Summer following behind. In the low red light of the bulbs, I could see shelves with glass figurines all around us. Every single glass figurine was a different jack-o'-lantern. Every single one of them has a different expression, all of them focused on us, their empty glass eyes staring at us. At first, I thought the mouth opening was just an illusion of the low light filtered through the glass. Though, after a moment, I realized that all of the mouths were identical. They were wide open and getting wider, like they were all silently screaming at us. That focus and fear haunted something deep inside of me as Dylan made his way to the door. The dim red bulb over the door showed us that it was one that we could enter. Dylan carefully opened the door, and as he opened the door, the silent screams of the jack-o'-lanterns were no longer silent. They were shrill, and it felt like a drill inside of my skull as we plunged through the door to escape. When we made it through, we paused for a moment while in the foyer. "Oh, I thought that was too easy until the end," Autumn said, and I nodded. I think he was expecting us to make a mistake, and then the screaming would have gotten worse and worse, but now we're in the second to last room, I responded. "One of these doors is the way out, and the rest have a monster behind them. Unlike the first room, the monsters will move around, so that will be harder. How will we find our way out?" And Summer answered, "I think Hikael had a great idea earlier. We can all listen to the doors. But unlike before, we don't rush through at first. We wait until the monsters shift, when we know we have 2 minutes to enter the exit." Summer said, and Autumn immediately agreed, and we agreed as well as we went to our doors. Behind my door, I could hear movement. It was a metallic slithering sound like a mechanical snake, except there were 8 of them, and I could hear the scratches and the mechanical noises along the door as they tried to get through the door. Dauncey went all out for the biotechnological monsters this year, a unique idea compared to the old-fashioned monsters and creatures from folklore. Still, I listened to the mechanical snakes as they shifted away, and they slithered away. I heard another noise behind my door. There was a consistent ticking behind my door, like from a mechanical clock. It was persistent, and despite myself, I couldn't help but imagine what was behind the door. I saw in my mind a large mechanical monstrosity, made from gears, wires, and pistons in a humanoid form. Rough mechanical teeth, sharp gears, and crushing pistons in its mouth, all eager to destroy me in a second. "Has anyone found a door without noise?" I asked everyone, and Autumn raised her hand. "There's no noise at all at my door. I think it's safe to go through," she said, and she opened it as we all followed. The hallway outside was made from cobblestone. As we followed and we arrived out in the garden. The night was dark and cold. The moon above was orange. The garden itself had croaking toads, crickets, crunching caterpillars, and even the caws of crows. There was a lot of life in the garden. The garden was growing roses in all colors. They were styled into a rainbow, even in the color purple, a color that I've never seen before outside of politics. Despite myself, the flowers were beautiful to see. The fence surrounding the garden had many electric lamps on the top to light the way as we made our way out of the garden. Every step felt electric. I expected there to be a monster, a trap, or even a snake with every step on the cobblestone path, but nothing happened the entire time. Near the exit, there was a pond. In the middle of the pond was a mossy rock with a lantern. On top of the lantern was a gray toad. On top of the gray toad was a white frog balanced like a hat on the toad's head. On top of the frog's head was a black pointed hat like a witch's hat. It was a very simple sight, but we all paused to look at the sight together. Out of all of the amazing and impossible things here, we were looking at a pond that had a rock with a lantern, with a toad, with a frog, with a witch's hat. Life was quite interesting like that, giving such simple but wondrous pleasures with such a sight. At the exit, the gate was unlocked, but taped to the gate was an envelope with my name on it. I opened the envelope. The only thing written on it was, "With regards, the Knight of Hearts." And inside the envelope was a rose with a stem. The thorns did not cut my skin, and it was apparently still alive. The petals of the rose were two shades of green, with a single shade of white, a shade of gray, and even petals that were jet black. Touching the petals, they were real petals, and no paint on them. The colors on the rose matched the colors on my flag pin. "Thank you, Dealer Jack," I said to no one in particular, as I tucked the envelope and the rose into my backpack as we made our way to the casino. Just beyond the gates, we could see the doors that led into the casino. There was only darkness outside, and when the doors opened, there was light and warmth flooding out of the doors. Like it was flooding out of an oven. Although we had no other way to go other than forward, I was not looking forward to the casino.